Hi, my name is Brendon Clark. I've been a contractor with Vic Forest in the regeneration part of the process since around about 2003. Me and my wife Rachel have maintained a contract with Vic Forest since 2006. We've been major contributors to the seed bank after the major fire events. We've been a part of two of the largest conservation efforts established in the state. One was after the 2008 fires, and more so recently after the 19 fires. We generally have around about a 12-month window to gather as much seed as possible before the understory comes up. Our native species doesn't do very well in shady conditions, so if you don't get them established within the first 12 months, there's not much chance of re-establishing them later. We have been mainly focused on our mountain ash and alpine ash. These are in remote areas, so we travel very far away from home to go and get this seed. At times I've been travelling one way around 5 hours out the other side of Omeo, then 5 hours return. After the Premier made the announcement 3 years ago, me and my wife decided we'd start transitioning away from the native timber industry. We looked at the whole scenario and identified that there was a huge environmental problem with the way that we manage our forest. We do believe that there was a future for forest, but not in the way you normally think about it. We had a firm understanding on how our bush works and the risks or the damage it can be done by major fire, and we're looking at ways that we could stop it from happening. So the main focus on the main problem that I foresee that the forest had is the actual understory. So our native Australians, they used to burn it frequently. So every 3 to 5 years or every 10 years, they'd identify that the area had been, gotten too thick. They'd set a light to it and develop natural fire breaks through that environment. So if a major bushfire came through, it hit that bank, it'd have no fuel load, and it'd turn from a bushfire just down to a normal cold burn. I started looking at ways that we could make this profitable. I always think that conservation is very important, but unfortunately the main reason that conservation is failing is because it's a lack of money. If there's no political will and there's no money or there's no donation, conservation fails, and the ups and lows that you have with an economy and the change of government, it tends to happen pretty often. So I looked at the problem and I identified that we had to give biomass a value. So when I talk about biomass, I'm actually referring to that in the story. That's a key point on where our problem lies, and then how to identify how we can give that a value. So after we identified the problem, we looked for the solution. So one of the first solutions I figured was giving biomass a value is to simply just use it for firewood. So I know firewood has been given a pretty tarnished name because of the way it's been dried out. So what I did from my experience working in a sawmill when I was younger, I started developing a method so we could kiln dry the firewood. This removes a lot of the carcinogenic material, because a lot of the carcinogenic material happening with a fireplace is actually because generally the wood's too wet. So what I wanted to do is, if I could remove the water and transport it from site straight to the customer dry, it also reduced on the transport costs. So this is a key part of what we're planning to do with the biomass at the beginning. Knowing that the transport cost was what would kill the project. By reducing on the transport costs, what it does is you go from site straight to the house. Now, if you go to site straight to the house with a premium product, so drying the firewood down to a decent moisture content, it actually turns into a premium product because then it's actually more efficient to burn on top of that. So a lot of the energy used when you're burning firewood is actually to get rid of the remaining amount of water, because water is quite a stable thing to move. It would clean up the air supply. We could actually start manufacturing better fireplaces. We could actually manufacture fireplaces that actually produce biochar, so you could use firewood. And I do believe if we transfer the market into cheaper firewood, that actually brings down the cost of living. So the cost of living is soared, energy prices are soared, gas especially is soared. So if we can give people a viable option that they can afford, they have got a reliable product, it is dry, and it is renewable. So that's why I identified firewood as the first shortcut to giving that biomass a decent value. The second part of the project I was working on is the gasification part of the project. So what happens with gasification is you get material, you set it on fire, and what you do is you reduce the amount of oxygen that the fire has. So it's a smouldering fire in, say, a 44-gallon drum. You cut the oxygen off at the top, reduce the amount of oxygen you have. You draw the syngas out, which stops the combustion happening in that drum. What happens is then you have a syngas. The fire continues to burn, smoulder, and then you siphon the gas off, clean the tars and all that out of it, and then you can run a combustion engine on it. The biochar, which is the charcoal left over, is one of the most carbon negative materials on the planet. There's no real carbon emissions from this process because the fire doesn't ever get a chance to get hot enough. It doesn't really burn the carbon. And what that carbon is it's really like a battery for the ground. So because of our dry climates, this stuff holds 3 times its weight in moisture. It can be charged with fertilizer. It gives the plant access to nutrients all year round, plus water. So, and it also stops salinity, leaching of chemicals going from the ground, because it actually really grabs a hold of whatever it's nutrients in the ground, and the bacteria love it. So it really brings the ground back to life. So with my gasification part of the process is we're at the first stages. We've done stage 1. We've identified that my method is plausible. This was a key part that I've passed. So I was hoping that the timber industry would continue, so I could finish my my feasibility study, and then I could move into the next part of it, which is the grant application for the prototype. So it's a bit disappointing that my financial situation is at great risk at the moment because of the change of the timber industry, but even so, that I think the technology, even if it wasn't me, does have a place in at our forestry practices, trying to protect our bush. So even if it's not me developing the technology, I think that if we learned the method of turning, making biochar and gas, this gas can be cleaned up. We have plenty of gas turbines running in Melbourne, running down in Gippsland, that we could subsidise to run on this gas, because it does burn very cleanly. It is a syngas. It only has half the energy potential of LPG, but biochar itself is 25% of the material you put in. It is high grade material, so generally just carbon alone's worth about $700 a tonne, but this stuff's worth a lot more than that. And because of our strain, because of the fertiliser costs we have, it is a real good substitute for fertiliser, and it's a long-term storage for carbon. So this stuff stores away for tens of thousands of years. It's been identified in some places across the world where it's been in the ground 500 years, and the ground's the most fertile ground on the planet. And because Australia's really set for the next food boom, if we can use our forestry waste to produce biochar, we're really setting up our farmers for prime crops. Biochar was been here since before the Europeans arrived. It normally happens naturally through smouldering fires, but because we clear felled everything, chain and bulldozer, burnt the lot, and then planted our crops, a lot of that biochar is now washed away. So re-establishing this biochar back in the ground would be huge beneficial thing for everyone involved. The other benefit of gasification is the carbon it stores. So unfortunately with fire events, the carbon in our bush is under threat. What I really want to do is take that carbon that is, or the understory, that we can grab that understory, put it into stable carbon. So stable carbon is different than storage in a tree. It's actually stable. It will last for tens of thousands of years. Trees have a lifespan. They go through a lifespan. They re-emit carbon. This is a key fight against climate change, but it also double dips our bush's ability to sequester carbon. So protecting its carbon stores, double dipping on how much carbon it can store, benefiting our native species with fresh regrowth. So everything thrives in this environment as well as the environment itself. I do believe that if we were to put practices like this into place using our forest for this, what it does is it really gives a value to the biomass, but also if we do produce energy from this, it actually produces carbon negative. So it's not just a renewable, it's actually carbon negative renewable energy. So if you say have a home, right, and it uses 20 kilowatts a day, if you can get a gasifier running a house as you would do a solar system, it can produce energy 24 hours a day. This is a huge benefit because the byproduct of gasification is actually heat. So 60% of the home's bill is through heat. So normally a 20 kilowatt home is now running on, say, 10 kilowatts. It has free heat. That heat can be used for heating electricity. It's actually be used as a hot water boiler system. The benefit of that as well is that house is now carbon negative. So, and these units aren't complicated, not the ones I'm trying to produce, and they already have been developed. But they're also fully recyclable. So basic parts, off-the-shelf parts, like we can manufacture these things in Australia and really corner the carbon market. Because we have so much access to biomass on top of this, it really, if we develop technology like this, we can protect our forest as well as export biochar and biomass itself.